Jan Doyle. Welcome to Classroom Connections. Today's guest, I found him at the local library, or I should say, I found a book, I made a phone call, and it led to this program. I'm so happy to welcome to the show Dr. Lucianne Lavin you're the Director of Research and Collections at the Institute of American Indian Studies. Welcome. I know you had a very long ride. And you brought with you the Executive Director, Laurie Lammarre. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you. There's a lot you can get at the library, and that's how I found you. And we'll get into more of your book that you wrote in a minute. But I'd like to make sure we really have time to talk about the Institute for American Indian Studies. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, the Institute for American Indian Studies is a museum and research center in the town of Washington, Connecticut. So it's up in the northwest corner. And we are actually celebrating our 40th anniversary this year in 2015. So we've been there a while. We have a series of exhibitions and collections that focus on Native American culture, heritage, as well as contemporary issues. But one of our most loved exhibits is actually our reproduction 15th century Algonquian village, where you can actually walk in and out of the wigwams or wetus behind our museum.
You know, I saw some wigwams on your website. I went to your website. You have a very a complete, informative website.
Thank you.
And so could you tell me a little bit about some of the programs that you offer at the Institute?
Sure.
Or some of the annual events?
Sure. So actually coming up in June, we do have normally would be a Strawberry Moon Festival, but we are actually flipping that this year, and we're doing a Strawberries Under the Stars fundraiser. And that's going to be Friday, June 12th. This summer, we do have our Green Corn Festival, which is August 1st, which is really an opportunity to learn a lot more about Native American music, as well as dancing. As well as food, which is always the best part, I think, as well as the dancing and the drumming, but the food's pretty good too. But it's really a great opportunity to experience Native contemporary culture.
That is a wonderful, wonderful, it sounds like a wonderful event. Yeah. We'll have to have you come back again so we can talk more about it. Now, being a research center and a museum, do you have any opportunities for children to go to?
We do. Actually, one of our what I think we're most known for by many people in Western Connecticut is our school programming. So generally, children come from schools all over the western side of the state, even eastern Connecticut, as well as eastern New York, to experience some of our field trips that we have to offer. A lot of our school programming focuses on children ages grades 3, 4, 5, 6, but we do offer outreach programming for a lot of the middle school years as well as the high school. And you can actually contact our education department through our website, which is www.iaismuseum.org.
That's a great idea. And if people forget that, you can always contact me at Classroom Connections, and I can forward you the information and steer you in the right direction. Years ago, I used to be in a group of women, and we called ourselves Moon Sisters, and we would follow Native American practices and meet once a month under the full moon and have several the smudging and different events. And it's always been a loved part of my life, but I've always had a huge interest in Indians and their past history and their current, and there's so much I don't know. So this is a wonderful opportunity. So we're here specifically today to talk about Venture Smith. Now, I have to tell you, this is how I found you. I'm doing some personal research on the Underground Railroad. I have a program for it, and I was just doing a search for more information that the library might have. And I came across this book, and I took it out, and I noticed your name, you wrote this book. So instead of me talking about Venture, I thought it'd be a much better idea if you talked about it. How did this book come about?
Well, we actually were contracted to do a huge survey on the Connecticut Yankee Atomic Energy property in Haddam Neck. They were about to close down the facility, and federal regulations say that they have to have an archaeological survey, which lasted from 2001 to 2008, believe it or not. It was a huge project because we had to investigate over 580 acres. And on part of that acreage was Venture Smith's homestead.
Did you know that before you went into it?
We knew that he lived there, but the actual cellar hole that everybody thought he had lived in wasn't the house at all. It was on the opposite side of Haddam Neck. It actually belonged to white folks. But once we started to do the deed work, then we realized exactly where his homestead was.
Oh, now that's interesting. So it wasn't just on-site information. There was historical research and information that went
Archaeology
into it.
always includes digging in the archives. A very important aspect, especially when you're dealing with historic sites.
Now, I just want to say, I'm surprised when the nuclear power plant went up, they didn't do an archaeological dig around the site. I thought they needed to do that before anything of that.
They bought the property much earlier. It belonged to, I think, the electrical company in the beginning. So they had the property, I think, in the 1960s, which was before federal regulations came in on that.
Okay, okay. So now you're specialized, obviously. You have your doctorate degree and you do this. Are people like me who don't have any of that, are we allowed on the property or not?
On the Connecticut Yankee property now, actually nobody is allowed on that property at this point. It's closed off for a number of reasons, because they've got their spent fuel actually enclosed in a building there, which is highly
radioactive?
Yes, and also, you know, people may want it. So
what would you want that for? I mean, really, what would you want that for?
And what do you use the uranium for? You know.
Oh.
Anyway, so it is boxed off, but Connecticut Yankee doesn't own the Venture Smith site anymore. It's United States Fish and Wildlife that have gotten the property. Mm-hmm. So they have it, but they haven't opened it to the public as of yet.
Oh, really? So if I wanted to go see this, I can't go see. You're shaking your head. You couldn't get me in?
It's fenced in.
Wow. Why? What is their reasoning for that? Because I would think this would be huge.
Well, the problem is you get people who will try and trash historic sites. They're looking for buttons. They're looking for bottles. You can sell those things on eBay. So
Yes,
you have to be very careful. That's why we often don't even tell people where Native American sites are, where there are no above ground structures to see. It's below ground, because people destroy the site. And once you go in and put a shovel in, you're destroying, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 years of history.
I have the state archaeologist.
Archaeologist.
Thank you, the state archaeologist on, and I've learned a lot from him. And
I saw that program.
yeah, he was wonderful, and so my education is building, and I got him. Well, it makes no reason how I got him, but I'm learning that. So before we get into the actual site of Venture Smith, can you tell me a little bit, why is he so important?
Yes, I will. And I also want to tell you that the reason we made this is an archaeological preserve, and we do that with a number of sites. Somewhere here they actually have it listed, a list of the archaeological preserves, because that not only prevents trespassers from coming on the property, but you can actually, if you do trespass and God forbid put a shovel in, you can not only be arrested and fined, you can actually have jail time with
archaeological
an archaeological, yes, preserve.
So are you suggesting I don't go there?
Recommend it.
So I'm just saying it's an important way of preserving the site,
Yes.
making it into an archaeological, a state archaeological preserve. It's a way of protecting a significant site.
Well, you know what, I think that is obviously very smart, because I do know there are people that will go out and do that and destroy.
Oh,
and
yes, there are.
Lots of things have been destroyed already that are not recoverable. So that's interesting to know. I'm not going to go. You won't see my name in the paper. So who was Venture Smith?
Venture Smith's original name was Brotier Furrow. He was the son of a West African prince. He was the firstborn son, very important. And when he was around 6 years old, his tribe was attacked by another tribe. The tribe was destroyed, many people were killed, and the rest were sold into slavery. So at 6 years old, he was sold to a Rhode Island man as a slave, and was actually made the passage, the infamous passage from the African slave castle across the Atlantic, first to the Caribbean, and I think about a third of the Africans on board that ship actually died of smallpox.
Yes, you're right.
And then he went on up into New England, and he was over 30 years a slave, at which point his last slave owner, Oliver Smith, allowed him to work after his slave hours to buy his freedom. But with every dollar he made, he had to pay Smith 65 cents of that dollar, even though he was working off his slave hours.
I think I
Can you
missed
imagine that?
part.
So he buys his, it took him, I forgot how many years, it took him years to have his, to buy his slavery, and then he bought his son's freedom, and his wife's freedom, and his daughter's freedom.
I think the amazing part in this is, first of all, I just have gotten more and more interested from this, but the amazing part is that he was worked hard as a slave and still, after that, worked more and gave more than half of his earnings away and still was able to succeed. He wasn't your average person, black or white. You know, I mean, I don't think...
Physically, he was very different.
Yes.
He was over 6 foot tall.
Very unusual for the time.
He had a 72-inch girth around 6 feet.
Wow.
He was extremely, there are folkloric tales about him in Rhode Island, Long Island, and Connecticut, about him carrying a man on his back for 2.5 miles, making 16 cords of wood in a day. Now, 1 cord of wood, it's 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet. It's a huge, you know. There's all of these tales about his strength.
I read somewhere he was compared to Paul Bunyan.
A black Paul Bunyan.
Yes, yes. Well, actually, it was me. If someone was interested in these folk tales, where would I go on the web and search for them, or is there a place?
Yeah, I have references in that book as well, but you
that
can,
might be
if you
the
go on
page
the
I'm
web,
missing.
probably. There are references in there. There's a Rhode Island clergyman, I think, who writes about him, and there's a number of others. But anyway, he is actually internationally known. He is being studied by a number of international scholars because he dictated his autobiography to a white abolitionist, Alicia Niles, in 1798, and it's one of the few slave narratives that actually talks about his time in Africa as well as here. Another reason he is just so famous is because he becomes a great success.
Yes.
By the time he dies, he has a 130-acre farmstead on Haddam Neck. He also owns a huge number of boats. He's not only a successful farmer, but he's also in the river trade, the merchant trade. He owns a number of boats. He does a lot of river trade. He's also doing fishing. He owns a fish house and an island. And he's partners with a lot of very prestigious whites, because the narrative talks about how he's always cheated in his younger period. So he, as one of the strategies against that, he partners with very prestigious white men the Brainerds, the Chapman, these are well-known, prestigious families in those areas. In fact, even Samuel Huntington, who's a congressman and signs the Declaration of Independence, is one of his partners.
Yes, yes. Well, you know, I have to tell the public, we're going to go to slides in about 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, but I want to just show the public your book, and if they want to get, I know you can get it on interlibrary loan. That's where, I mean, it's you know, it's very simple title, The Venture Smith Homestead, and you can remember the title, Venture. Where did he get that name?
Well, of course, the whites change his name when he becomes a slave, but Robertson Mumford buys him with his own money, his own venture capital, and that's where he got his name.
So you can remember the name and go to interlibrary loan and get it, but do you sell it at the Institute?
No, but I think, we were talking about this coming up because I didn't check, but we have a number of these archaeological preserves that you can download off our museum website. And I think Venture Smith is one of them.
Oh, and you're talking about the that you're from. Oh, I don't think I noticed that. I will have to go back and check. In your book, we've had a discussion before this, but you also have a wonderful picture of the his original narrative. It's my thing. How can I get? There we go. Okay, and I wanted to get a copy of this, and I told you I have a horrible knee. I think it's from college where I have to underline everything. Well, I went on the web and through Amazon, everyone's bookstore, I was able to buy the narrative, and I found this very, very interesting, and I just wanted to know more. I wanted to know what this didn't tell. I think I wanted to see a 20th century or 21st century novel about, and I'm never going to get that. I do know that, but I wanted to know what he didn't say about his children, about his wife, about his personal feelings.
About his everyday activities,
yes,
about
yes.
His spirituality, his politics. It doesn't say that because, of course, it is written and edited by white men. And that's where archaeology comes in, because archaeology can often supplement the historical record. Sometimes it can even correct the historical record. For example, in the 1896 edition of this narrative, the initial preface or introduction is written by Henry Selden. And he talks about Venture having a little house. Well, when we excavated his house, he had a 2-story center chimney house, and it was at least 20 feet wide by 40, possibly even 60 feet long, because we did not excavate the entire house. So it was a pretty good-sized house for that time period.
Well, actually now, even, do you go on these digs, or is that not your job?
No, I actually do have a background in archaeology, but not with the Institute for American Indian Studies.
So you don't go on these particular digs?
I was not on this one. However, I do remember this iron kettle here. So.
Okay, well, why don't we, this has been here, and I have to tell the viewing audience, I'm not allowed to touch it. I'm not, and they have gloves, I'm just saying. And when Mike was going to offer to help bring in the boxes, because it's a woman coming, she wasn't allowed to touch it. So if anything happens to this, not our fault. But they also made the point that I wanted to take it out, where they have this foam here, but you didn't want to, because this comes from Venture's homestead. Homestead.
Archaeological, his homestead, it was actually excavated from the center of one of the cellars of one of the 3 houses on Venture's home site. There's the center chimney house where Venture and his wife lived, and there's these 2 smaller houses that are sitting up on the hillside overlooking the homestead that his sons lived in. And that came from one of the, right in the center.
Well, you didn't want to remove the foam because you said the
bale is the handle's very fragile.
And there's also, I'm hoping, I can't really see it, but if they can see it, there's a mark here, but this is an actual crack in the kettle. But I asked a very, I'm realizing now, dumb question, where
No dumb questions.
Yeah, well,
No dumb
thank you.
questions,
Very
okay.
kind. Well, thank you. But you explain. I thought this was kind of touched up, but you explain the process for doing. Could you explain that for the viewing audience?
Sure. So what you're looking at is what we would call the cleaned up version or conserved version of this kettle. And when this came out of the ground, I wasn't there, but I'm sure Lucy, Dr. Lucy, would remember that it didn't look quite like this.
It looked very rusted, very brownish.
Did it have additional kind
Well, it was
of rust?
full of dirt. We actually took it back to the lab full of the dirt and then excavated the dirt from it.
Oh, that would make sense.
And I would imagine that along kind of the bail here, the handle itself, this was very much rusted over, as well as the
We didn't
handle
even know
probably
there was a bale there. They actually, Mashantucket Pequot Museum actually conserved this for us. And they took x-rays first of the kettle, the filled kettle, and saw exactly where the bale was. And then very gently and delicately conserved all of it.
Yep.
What is that process of conserving?
Sure. You know, I was luckily, when I was at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center, I was able to work with Doug Curry, who was the conservator at the museum at the time. And I do remember sitting in the lab. And so what he would have done is first x-rayed the actual object first.
That's so interesting to me that they did that.
Yep, so because when it came out of the ground, it was covered with extra, we'll call it rust. You know, all of that corrosion that happens when you, say, leave your bicycle out in the rain. And when Doug x-rayed this and then came back and took a look and was able to compare, you could see all the details and what was that extra corrosion that had added to it. So he would have gone back and forth between x-rays as well as the object, and he would have likely, and I wasn't there for this process, but used some type of air abrasion or tool to remove very slowly the extra corrosion and rust that had built up around this. When he finally was able to remove all of that, he would make sure he wasn't, number one, damaging the original material, but then he would have probably covered this in some type of almost like a wax or solution that would have allowed this to look beautiful as it does sitting here before us today.
That's very interesting. The process is interesting.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
How it's so interesting to me that this was discarded and more effort than was ever probably intended to recover it. And you do get a feeling of the history. And you said this has spirits?
It wasn't discarded. It was purposely buried in the center of this cellar. Now, it has both economic and spiritual value. Economic value, it is a cast iron kettle. The cast iron kettle was the major utensil in an 18th and 19th century kitchen. It was where, because most of those kitchens had open fires, and this would be put, the three legs would help you put it right over the fire or the coals, or you could hang it by the bail from a hook and cook stews, gruels. You could even make bread in it. And so it was a major utensil, but also metal has spiritual significance for Africans as it does for a number of non-Western societies. It has power. Metal has power, and it can bring or ward off spirits. And kettles are sometimes found buried in cellar halls or beneath the floorboards of slave cabins, or even at doorways or windows where spirits can come in and enter or leave a house.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
It's part of what's called the Minkizi ritual. Minkizi are charms, and we probably have some right over here too.
Dr. Lavin, I have to tell you, my director just came into my ear and told me we only have a few minutes left, which kind of shocked me because we have quite a bit more to talk about. And so this is what I was thinking. I was thinking that we tape a part 2 immediately after this ends so that we can go into all those slides and we can go into these artifacts if you have the time to stay another 28 minutes, if that's possible.
That's good for me. Good for
Fine for
you?
me.
Because
Yeah, of course.
otherwise, I mean, and we'll just start part 2 from this because I don't want the audience to miss the information that was in your book and to be able to talk about it. So if, Mike, did you hear me on that one? Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is we're going to wrap this up now, and then we'll start part 2 in a little bit. But what, again, is your website?
Our website is www.iaismuseum.org.
And I highly recommend that for people to go to. It's a little bit of a drive from here, but it seems obviously worth it. And you work with the Institute, is that correct?
I'm the Director of Research and Collections at the Institute.
So then you do have a job there. Okay, fine.
Yes, I do.
I'm just saying.
And it's a beautiful ride.
It is.
It is.
You know,
It's a lovely ride.
The Northwest corner in Connecticut is just one of those remarkable places that I feel everybody should visit. And
Yes.
people who come to the Institute, they walk away feeling something very special. It is a very intriguing place, and people do often feel like they're home when they're there.
how nice.
Yeah, and we sit on 15.5 acres. There are trails. We also border Steep Rock Preserve, which goes down and to the Chippewa River. It's just a really beautiful place to spend the day, especially if it's nice outside.
And we have signage on all of our paths,
Yes, we
too,
do.
telling you what Native people use the trees and the flowers and everything else for.
Oh, I'll have to go. There's no question
Yeah.
about it. If you have any questions on this particular program, you can always contact me at classroomconnections365.com, or you can call me or contact me through my email, jmdteach@comcast.net. And you stay tuned because there will be a part 2. I'm just saying. Thank you so much.
Thank you.